We are hearing about John the Baptist. It may seem strange, Advent, this is Christmas season, so why aren't we just hearing Christmas stories all the time? Wouldn't that be the obvious thing to do? But the fact is that Advent is about waiting, and the people had been waiting for a long time for the Messiah to come. And so today's reading is about John the Baptist, who started proclaiming out in the wilderness by the banks of the Jordan River that the Messiah was actually about to arrive. And he wasn't talking about the birth of Christ, he was talking about Jesus as a mature man, around 30 years old. And a lot of people had heard of this John the Baptist guy, and they thought that he was a prophet. And he looked and sounded like an old-time prophet. We have a picture of him here, I think. So this is what he probably looked like. He didn't wear much in the way of clothing, and he would stand by the river and just rail at people. And it was precisely the intensity of the way he talked to people that convinced them that, this guy may actually be a prophet like Isaiah and Jeremiah, because he's not cutting any corners and he's not giving us any slack. But it's interesting what John said in practice. He doesn't talk about the fate of Israel as a nation. That's what all the other prophets did. They said, Israel, you've gone down a bad path. You've done something which is going to earn you God's approbation, right? Isaiah and Jeremiah said, if you don't change your ways, foreign armies are going to come in, they're going to invade, and they're going to decimate Jerusalem. Over and over again, prophets always spoke about Israel as a nation, but John doesn't talk like that. John talks about you and you and you. He talks about individuals. He says, you got to change your ways. He doesn't talk about the nation of Israel. He talks about individuals. And if you want to look for the roots of Western modern individualism, that idea that an individual's fate matters, look right here. This is where it starts. It takes 1,800 years to really get going, but this is where it starts, where the faith shifts from the fate of nations to the fate of the individual. Now, John is really good with colorful language. And he says, the harvester is coming, and he's going to cut down the good trees, and he's going to cut down the bad trees, and he's going to burn the bad trees, and he's going to harvest and bring in the good trees. Holy cow. And he's talking about individuals, right? Not nations. So the obvious question is, so is that me? Am I one of the bad trees, or am I one of the good trees? Reasonable question. And one of the things which everybody knew was that some of the people who were considered the worst human beings in Israel were coming out to hear John, the tax collectors. Everybody hated the tax collectors because they worked for the Romans. And they often extorted extra money from the people they were collecting taxes from. And the Roman soldiers, of course, everybody hated them because they were the occupying force. And they both came out, we hear in today's reading, to hear what John has to say. If anybody's a bad tree, it's a tax collector or a Roman soldier. But John says to them, hey, not all is lost for you. If you change your ways, you can still be part of the good harvest. Tax collector, stop ripping people off. Roman soldier, don't use your violence gratuitously. Don't beat people up just because you feel like it. Treat them fairly. So even from John, who sounds so strong about good trees and bad trees are going to burn, he actually offers a way to change if they change their behavior. But what's interesting is that when he starts talking about the Messiah, his metaphor changes. He's not talking about good trees and bad trees anymore. He's talking about wheat and chaff. And he says when the harvester, the Messiah, arrives, he's going to gather the wheat, but he's going to burn the chaff. Now that sounds to our ears like more of the same, right? Good people and bad people will burn in hellfire, and good people will be saved. But that's because we don't actually know much about wheat. For most of us, wheat's that thing you see out the car window when you go for a drive in the country. Oh, look at the lovely yellow wheat in the farmer's field, right? Or you go to the grocery store and wheat to you is, well, am I going to buy white flour or am I going to buy brown flour? Am I going to buy white bread or brown bread? Brown bread's good for me, but I like the white bread. It's those sorts of decisions we make when it comes to wheat. Well, back then, lots of people took the wheat stalk, cleaned it up, made their own flour. So they understood wheat much more intimately than we do. So they're getting a reference here that we don't get. So let me explain a little bit about wheat. Wheat is a grass. It goes to seed. That's what we want. The seeds, are called wheat berries. A wheat berry is covered by a husk, a light husk, which is called the chaff. You can eat it, but you're not going to enjoy it. It actually soaks things up in the digestive tract, so you will feel very sick if you eat a lot of chaff. So people learned early on in the agricultural revolution that you want to get rid of the chaff, and what you really want is the wheat berry. The wheat berry is the thing which it actually has 3 layers, and if you grind all 3 of those layers, you get whole wheat, like whole grain bread. It's made out of this. If you take off 2 of the layers and just keep what's inside, you get white flour. What you don't want is the chaff. So what did they do? Well, what they did was they would cut down the wheat stalks, put them on the ground, and then they would thrash them. They would just beat them. And that would loosen the wheat berries and the chaff from the stalk. And then they'd pour it all into a basket. Now you're down to the berries and the chaff. The chaff is still on the berry. And then they would take the basket and they'd throw it up in the air, like they'd hold onto the basket, but they'd throw the contents into the air. And the wheat berries and the chaff would go up, but the chaff would be blown away. And you hope it was best to do this on a windy day. When I looked this up on YouTube, people still do this as a sort of, home project, but when they do it, they just set up a fan, and they just do it in front of the fan, and the chaff blows it away, so they use an artificial wind. So the chaff blows away, and then you've got the wheat berry left. Okay, so let's return to John's metaphor. When the Messiah comes, he will come as a harvest, and he is going as a harvester, and he's going to keep the wheat berries, and he's going to burn the chaff. Okay, but if people are the wheat, a wheat berry is no good without its protective covering. It needs that protective covering of the chaff while it's growing, because that's what keeps the dust off of it, keeps the rain off of it, keeps bugs out of the berry. It's important. It's a defensive mechanism. And it's only when you harvest it that you separate the chaff from the wheat berry. So if people are wheat, then people are chaff and the wheat berry. They come together. You can't say that you want one without the other. You can't walk into a wheat field and find just chaff in one part and wheat berries in the other. It doesn't work that way. Chaff and wheat berries go together. So John is saying when the Messiah comes, he's going to separate the chaff from the wheat berry and get rid of the chaff and keep the wheat berry. So if people are the wheat, which part of us is the chaff and which part is the wheat berry? Because they're both part of us apparently, but one of them is disposable. Well, think about this. It can't be good people and bad people, because when Jesus was out on the streets, he was infamous for hanging out with bad people. Right? Jesus had no problem hanging out with sinners. He had dinner with them. He had dinner with a tax collector, for goodness sakes. So it can't be good people and bad people. The other thing Jesus said was that when you want to understand human beings, you got to go inside them. Jesus is all about our interior life, right? Not about our behavior so much. He felt free to break various rules, but he cared about how we feel. He famously said, "You've heard that it's not right to commit adultery, but I tell you it's not right to lust after another woman who isn't your wife." He was all about the interior, right? There's this big shift from just what you do to how you think. So if that's the case, it suggests that the chaff and the wheat are about our emotional inner life. One of them is disposable. Some part of our emotional life is disposable. So what is it? And here's a thought experiment for you. Let's say you die and you go to heaven. Okay? You've been at the pearly gates, you got in, phew, you made it, great. All this church going paid off. And now you're in heaven. And you're going to spend a lot of time in heaven, the rest of time in heaven. What aspects of your personality would you like to do without? We've all got, hamsters in our heads that, go on that wheel in our heads and kind of torture us. And we go, oh, I'm thinking that again, or I'm doing that again, or I'm feeling that again. What aspects of you would you like to do without in heaven forever? Well, some people would say, I don't want to be depressed in heaven. I've had quite enough of depression in this life. Let me give that up. Doctors tell us that depression is a neurochemical problem. Well, you're in heaven. Why should you be encumbered by a neurochemical problem? Other people might say, I think it's my anxiety. I would like my anxiety to go away. I don't want to be thinking about that thing and the next thing and the next thing that could go wrong. I'm in heaven. I want to have a good time. Let my anxiety go away. Each of us would probably choose different things because it's very idiosyncratic, the things which, bother us in our heads. Is it some obsessive compulsive? Is it ADHD? Take your pick. All of us have something. And what's interesting is that all of those behaviors are actually useful to a degree, right? Being a little bit anxious is pretty handy if you're trying to make plans. And you may have noticed that if you've ever worked in a team, the optimists need to have some anxious people on the team. Because the optimists will say, it'll all be great. Don't worry, this is going to be fantastic. And the anxious people are ones that say, well, wait, you haven't thought 3 steps ahead. 3 steps ahead, we're going to run into trouble. So it's good to have anxiety to a degree in your makeup because it keeps you out of trouble. And evolutionary psychologists have said, okay, well, why do we have depression? Depression seems so dysfunctional. We can't get out of bed. How could that possibly be useful? And yet it's reproduced generation to generation to generation. You'd think it'd be a behavior trait that would evolve out because it's so useless. And they argue that actually depression has its uses. When the world's a genuinely dangerous place, the people who are too depressed to get out of bed are the ones who survive. Because they were the ones with their heads down when trouble came. Now, you don't want to be depressed all the time, and unfortunately with depression, your depression button can get stuck, right? And that's when we need medication and therapy and stuff, because sometimes it just goes too far and it stays on too long. But a little bit of depression, like a little bit of anxiety, is actually pretty useful. And even being a little obsessive can be good. Those dishes have got to get clean. So if there's someone in your family who just insists on the kitchen always being clean, well, that's kind of useful for the group. It can be taken too far, but a little bit's okay. All of these characteristics are defense mechanisms. They're defense mechanisms because there really are dangers in life. There are dangers to be avoided. And so we've evolved with defense mechanisms. But when we end up in heaven, when we end up right next to the Messiah, with God, living with God, we don't need those defenses anymore. Because we're in the place where there is no trouble, by definition. And so, John the Baptist is saying, when the Messiah comes and you're united with the Messiah, after death, at the end of the world, you can do without all those defense mechanisms. They will not be necessary anymore. That raises another question. Okay, so if that's the chaff that'll blow away, then what part of us is the wheat berry? What part of us is the essential core which we will experience when we are at our closest with God? Well, that's a little bit easier. It's our soul. Our soul, in spiritual terms, is our essential part. But as I said earlier, Jesus is all about how you feel, not what you're doing. And you did good if you got to heaven, right? And continue our thought experiment. So what's that essential part of your soul? What are the feelings of your soul? Well, we know this. We know the answer to this from a whole bunch of different sources. One are near-death experiences. If you've ever read about these people who've had a near-death experience where they see the light, right, and they draw near to the light, they don't say that it's scary or upsetting. They say that it feels great. They feel enveloped by love, a greater love and comfort than they've ever felt before. And many of them report that it feels like joy. And mystics, religious mystics from all over the world, every faith tradition, whether it's Hindu or Buddhist or Jewish or Christian, when they get close to God, they say that it's so wonderful they can't put it into words. They speak about light. Some of you may be familiar with Hildegard von Bingen or Thomas Merton. They speak about being filled with light and being filled with a kind of joy which is almost impossible to put into words. St. Paul in our New Testament describes going up to the third level of heaven, and he refuses to describe what it's like because it's so different and so wonderful relative to regular human experience. All of us have experienced joy in small amounts, right? Think about your life. If there was ever a time where you had an experience where you weren't sure whether you were going to laugh or you were going to cry, right? It's just so overwhelming. You feel like your heart's going to burst. That's joy. Women experience this often when they're in labor. They've just given birth to the baby. It's been the most excruciating, painful physical experience they've ever had. And then the nurse or their partner hands them this newborn child into their arms. And I've seen a number of births, and boy, women don't know whether to laugh or cry. Often they do both at the same time. They've been pushed to the utter limit. And there is this wonderful, fantastic gift that comes after it feels like they've just been torn right open. Like it's the biggest contrast ever. How could something so fantastic come out of an experience so painful? And yet it does, and that's how we're made. Athletes, right? You see athletes at the end of an Olympic sprint. They've run as fast as they can, and of course, nowadays, they measure a win by fractions of a second. So they have no idea whether they won the race because there were two people right next to them as they crossed the finish line. They have no idea if their nose was in front or the other person's nose was in front. So they finish the race, and they're huffing and they're puffing and they're leaned over, and they look up at the scoreboard, and they can't believe it. They're the ones who won. And they have that same kind of experience that we see with mothers. They get teary-eyed, they laugh, they can't believe it. Like mothers, they've been pushed to the absolute limit of their physical endurance, and now they have this experience. Children are actually much better at joy than we are. Give a kid a puddle, and they can find joy, right? They just jump right in, jump up and down, splashing. They become one with the puddle, much to the consternation of their parents, That puddle and them becomes the same thing. They're in the puddle's on them, and it's fantastic as far as they're concerned. They love being in the puddle. Thing about joy is that it's one of those experiences where the inside and the outside merge, and where the defenses that you're usually carrying just go away, and you feel at one with something. Your ego's got to let a whole lot of defenses down for you to experience joy, which is one of the reasons why it often comes as a surprise, because you didn't expect it. A woman in childbirth, all of her defenses are down. She's just gone through a few hours of not being in control, right? The athletes tried as hard as he or she could to cross that finish line, but they're spent at the end of it. So when they look up, their defenses are down. And kids are new to this world. They've got egos. Goodness knows they've got egos. That's my toy. Yeah, they do. But they're still forming their egos, so the protective layer of ego around them still has holes in it, which is why they can lose themselves immediately and start jumping in a puddle, have a great time, and a minute later be crying about something else. They're all over the place emotionally. That's because their defenses are low. We adults have very good force fields around us, and we keep them up most of the time, which is great, except that it actually limits our capacity for joy. You see, but of course, we do have access to joy. It's just intermittent. You see this in musicians. If you've ever seen a bunch of amateur musicians get together and play some music, right? They pull out their guitars and they start singing a song. They sing the song. At the end of the song, maybe the people around them clap, and they all laugh. Professional musicians don't laugh at the end of every song, but amateur musicians do, because they felt transported to become part of something bigger than what they normally are. Joy happens when the chaff of our egos blows off and the kernel is revealed. The chaff always snaps back into place during this life, but John is saying that when the Messiah comes, he is going to give you an opportunity to lose that chaff forever. And the core of your being will be revealed, and the core of your being, when you're with God, is joy. Something deep inside of us knows that joy is our home country. Joy is actually what we deserve. And we're not going to get it much of the time while we're alive, but there's this expectation that we will when we pass on. Now, this may all seem really far-fetched. I get it. Like joy. Okay, well, if it's something that's going to happen at the end of my life, I guess I don't have to worry about it now. I get that. That's okay. Except, I would argue that our souls are present with us all the time, and they have more influence over our lives than we think. And my piece of evidence for this is the month of December. In the month of December, we spend the entire month Christmas shopping or thinking about Christmas shopping, and we spend a whole lot of time humming Christmas tunes and listening to them on the radio. There's entire radio stations now just devoted to Christmas music. What's that about? Why do we do this every year? And we buy all sorts of gifts that we know that no one really needs, but we give it to them anyway. We buy all this wrapping paper, which will be useful for all of a few seconds as it's being torn off, and then it gets thrown out. It's not terribly rational. And yet, our economy is crucially based on this one holiday that happens on December 25th. If you were to take out the sales from all the sales which happen, say from mid-October in anticipation to December 25th, take away all the Black Friday sales, take away all the people who get temporary work because of stocking shelves and working in stores and stuff, our economy would not be the same. Stores would go out of business, even worse than they have been during the pandemic. The economy counts on this whole Christmas craze. And what do we want most? Think about what you do when you buy a present for somebody. Go to the store, see the item on the shelf. You go, is this going to be good for so-and-so? And you go, I don't think so. Oh, so-and-so will love this. So-and-so will love this. And what you hope for is that on Christmas morning or whenever you see them, they tear open the wrapping paper, they see it, and what will the expression on their face be? Hopefully a little bit of joy. You understand me. You get me. And I know that you get me because you got me something which really, really speaks to me. Now, it's true, sometimes it's because they told you to get it. That's true. But the best presents, right, are the ones that they didn't tell you to get. And you guessed right. Now, they could have gone to the store and bought exactly the same thing for themselves, and they wouldn't have experienced any joy at all. They go, oh, that's the drill I need. Buy it. Oh, that's the dress I want. Buy it. Right? Just buy whatever you want. You don't get joy when you're out shopping. But if someone gives it to you, it means that the barrier between you and them has broken down. For that split second, they go, oh, you get me. You cared enough to give me something that is meaningful to me. And it's that breaking down of barriers, the chaff comes off the berry. That's when joy happens. And we all kind of hope that at least some of our presents will invoke a little bit of joy in the people that we give presents to on December 25th. And our whole economy for a couple of months is predicated on you hoping for a bit of joy. Right? If you thought that every present you were going to give was going to go, yeah, thanks, whatever, we wouldn't have December 25th. Right? We wouldn't have this crazy economy devoted to trying to inspire joy in people. I submit to you, folks, that billions and billions of dollars are actually being spent on what could be called a joy economy. Deep down, our souls want to see some joy in the people that we love. And we're willing to spend a ton of money to do it. We're willing to spend time in stores thinking and wondering and rejecting all of that because we want other people to experience joy. And we know it doesn't always work, and that's precisely why it's so striking that we try so hard. So, if that's what joy is like, sorry, I've gotten way ahead of myself. This is good. We're at the last paragraph. So, Christmas, if it's about joy, it all tracks back to that first Christmas day. Because when the angels showed up in front of the shepherds, they said, "Fear not, for lo, I bring you good news of great joy that shall be to all the people, because there was born to you today a Savior, who is Christ the Lord." This whole thing starts with a statement of joy. Because those angels standing there saw the heavens open up and they saw a host of angels. A host is not 10 angels, it's thousands of angels. They saw thousands of angels in the sky, all talking about joy and how fantastic it was that heaven's joy had come to earth in this small little baby. The separation between God and humanity had been dissolved. And these two things, which usually keep far apart, had come together in this one baby. Now, the funny thing is, when we remember this scene, right, we remember the angels singing. Hark the heralds, angels sing. They don't sing in the Bible. If you look at the wording, it doesn't say that they sang. But I think our instinct is right. We remember them singing because to us, music is where harmony happens, like we heard with the bells. Music is our way of saying everything's fitting together. All sorts of different pieces have fit together and have created something beautiful and wonderful that was greater than what we had before. And that's what joy is. So deep down, we know as we spend this month humming Christmas songs, listening to them on the radio in every conceivable genre, and as we go through the stores, which have got incessant Christmas music playing, deep down, our souls are looking to create some more joy in somebody else. Our joy is looking for company, because joy is our home country, as hard as that can be to believe in our day-to-day lives. It's the place that we always belong to, the one place we always know that we deserve to return to. The harvest time will come, and we'll put aside our defenses once and for all. We'll be truly united with each other and the Messiah that God sent, the Holy One who came to remind us that joy is our right, our inheritance, and our destiny. Joy is on the agenda, folks. It's just going to take a little while to get there. But until we get there, let's try and inspire some joy in each other. Amen.